Hi guys, it's Nia, and you're watching my
Crash Course.
For this video, we're going to talk about a branch of government. There are three branches: the judicial branch, the legislative branch, and the executive branch. Today, we're going to be focusing on the executive branch. Now for some historical context. George Washington and Abraham Lincoln established the presidential authority. George Washington established the primacy of national government by establishing federal primacy and the authority of the executive branch to collect taxes. Also created cabinets and asserted the president's role as chief executive. He gave the president power by using his inherent powers of declaring net neutrality. Inherent powers are powers that belong to the president and are inferred by the Constitution. Lincoln assumed powers that no president before him claimed. There are four legally questionable acts. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which allows those in prison to petition for release. He expanded the size of the U.S. Army. He ordered a blockade of southern ports without the approval of Congress, and he closed the U.S. mail to treasonable correspondence. He argued that he had that power from inherent powers. Franklin D. Roosevelt and his New Deal led the modern presidency by expanding the federal bureaucracy. He also personalized the presidency by establishing a new relationship between the presidency and the people. An example of this is his fireside chats, where he spoke directly to the public in a relaxed and informal manner about serious issues. Some constitutional powers of the president are the appointment power, the power to convene Congress, the power to make treaties, pardoning power, the veto power, and the power to preside over the military as commander-in-chief. The president's power of appointment means that the president can appoint ambassadors, judicial nominees, and other important officers. The president has the authority to make nearly 3,500 appointments, 1,125 needing Senate's approval. The power to convene Congress. The Constitution requires that the president informs Congress on certain issues periodically. An example of this is the State of the Union, as talked about later on in this video. The president has the power to make treaties which need 2/3 of Senate's approval. The president can make executive agreements between other nations without needing consent of the Senate. The president's power to veto. This means the formal constitutional authority of the president to reject bills passed by both houses of Congress, thus preventing them from becoming a law. Congress can override veto by 2/3 vote of each house, which is like a check on that power. The veto makes the president powerful in lawmaking. The president has the power to preside over the military. The Congress can declare war, but the president cannot. The presidents think that the war powers resolution is a restriction on their power as commander-in-chief. The president has the power of pardoning, meaning an executive grant providing restoration of all rights and privileges of citizenship to a specific individual charged with or convicted of a crime. They can exercise this power in cases excluding impeachment.
Oh, I didn't see you there. The executive branch is headed by the president. The qualifications of the president that you have to be 35 years of age, must be a natural-born citizen, and have at least 14 years of residency. Same applies for the vice president. The vice president has two roles: to break ties with the Senate and take over the presidency if needed. The president has many roles, 7 to be exact. The 7 roles of the president are commander-in-chief, chief executive, chief diplomat, legislative leader, economic leader, party leader, and head of state. For commander-in-chief, the president is the head of the U.S. military. He and Congress both share the power of war. The president's power is limited from the War Powers Resolution of 1973. It limits the president's power because Congress has to be notified within 48 hours of sending troops. As chief executive, the president carries out policy and laws. He's in charge of 15 departments and the federal bureaucracy. The president has the power of appointment. He can appoint federal judges and other officers. The president appoints the Solicitor General, who is the attorney of the U.S. The president's role as chief diplomat is to direct foreign policy and act as a representative of the U.S. in the relations with other nations. The president can make executive agreements. Doesn't need Senate's approval, and it's agreements with other nations. Congress can, although, refuse funds that the president may need to carry out executive agreements. As legislative leader, the president is referred to as a coalition builder because he can persuade Congress to focus on certain policies. The president can issue executive orders, which are rules of command by the president that have the force of law and don't need approval from Congress. The president has the veto power. Veto power means that the president can decline policy made by Congress. As economic leader, the president prepares the federal government's budget. Every year, the president holds a State of Union address and updating Congress on policy agendas and outline goals. The president rarely uses this, but he can call special sessions in Congress if necessary. As economic leader, the president prepares federal budget and plans how to raise and spend money. This budget must be approved by Congress. As party leader, the president acts as a representative for his or her party. He may do this in the State of Union address by addressing controversial issues that apply to their party. As head of state, the president acts like an example for our nation. Examples of this may include walking a dog, dancing, attending a dinner with celebrities. Now let's go back inside. No paparazzi, please. What? Is that Michelle Obama?
Why, thanks for the compliment, but no, I'm actually Aisha Howard, Nia's mom. And I'm here to talk to you about the executive branch and its cabinet. The executive branch has 15 departments. The Department of the State, the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, the Department of Labor, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, the Department of Veteran Affairs, and the Department of Homeland Security. There you have it, boys and girls, the cabinet.
Oh yeah, and the Department of the Interior. All these departments have special tasks to keep us safe and better America. The cabinet continues to grow as the needs of federal government interaction with the public grows. APCA ASMR. Okay, now let's talk about the cabinet departments. First, the Department of State. The Department of State is the oldest department, and it was created in 1789, and the first Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson. The current Secretary of State is Mike Pompeo. Its job is to make negotiations related to foreign affairs and provide info to citizens about other countries. It also represents the U.S. in the United Nations, and Department of State is responsible for making and conducting foreign policy. Now, next is the Department of Treasury. It manages government revenue. Some responsibilities are printing money, coining money, collecting taxes, preventing financial crises, and financial security. Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of Treasury. The Department of Commerce. They promote economic growth. They create jobs, which also has to do with the Department of Interior. They were created in 1903. An example is the U.S. Census Bureau. The Department of Labor, its purpose was to foster, promote, and develop working people. They improve working conditions and promote opportunities for profitable jobs. Examples are the 40-hour work week, the minimum wage. They enforce a lot of labor laws, like no child labor, and they oversee laws relating to the workplace. The Department of Health and Human Services deals with health, medicine, and social services. An example of a program made for this purpose is Medicare or Medicaid, or even Obamacare. Some agencies include the FDA, the CDC, the NIH. They set poverty guidelines for the U.S. The Department of Transportation ensures safe and efficient transportation system. They regulate planes, the train system, and highways. An example of this type of regulation is going through metal detectors before you get on a plane. They oversee safety guidelines for drivers and pilots. Some agencies include the National Highway Safety Administration and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Association. They organize driver's ed and flight requirements. The Department of Energy has to do with nuclear weapons, nuclear reactions, domestic energy production. These sometimes can entangle with the Department of War when it comes to nuclear weapons. Some offices include cybersecurity, nuclear energy, electricity, and environment. An agency is the NNSA, or the National Nuclear Security Administration. The Department of Education established policy regarding education. Some agencies include the Office of Civil Rights, FAFSA. This is the reason why we have the No Child Left Behind and national report cards, the Common Core curriculums. That the Department of Veterans Affairs manages and gives to former military people. They provide educational benefits as well as housing and rehab and jobs and healthcare. The Board of Veterans Appeals and the Veterans Health Administrations are agencies for this purpose. The Department of Homeland Security was created in response to 9/11. It was created to protect Americans from terrorists, protect the borders. It dealt with immigration, natural disaster, and long-term recovery. Some agencies are the U.S. Citizenship of Immigration Service, or USCIS, and the U.S. Coast Guard. They help with the environment of the water borders. Last department is Department of Housing and Urban Development. They use block grants. They create programs regarding mortgage and housing for elderly. They deal with poverty of certain neighborhoods and how to improve that. An agency includes the U.S. Interagency of Homelessness. Now we're going to talk about the federal bureaucracy. Many think that the federal bureaucracy is part of the cabinet, but it's not always the case because there are agencies that are separate from the government so that they won't be under the partisan influence.
Max Weber was a German economist who described the federal bureaucracy as a well-oiled machine. He defined the bureaucracy as a well-organized, complex machine that is a rational way for society to organize its business. He noticed there were 6 characteristics: its hierarchical authority structure, its task specialization or expertise, its extensive roles, its clear policies for the organization to follow, its merit principle, its impersonality, and its clear goals.
There are different types of agencies inside the federal bureaucracy, such as government, corporations, regulatory commissions, and independent executive agencies. Independent executive agencies are governmental units that closely resemble cabinet departments but have narrower areas of responsibility. This means they are separate from the government, so they have less partisan influence and they can think without pressure. Some examples of this are NASA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. Between some different agencies of the bureaucracy, there were types of alliances or relationships, such called the Iron Triangle. The textbook definition of this is the relatively ironclad relationships and patterns of interaction that occur among agencies, interest groups, and congressional committees or subcommittees. Issues networks, on the other hand, they're related, but the textbook's definition of this is the loose and informal relationships that exist among a large number of actors who work in broad policy areas. So instead of these being agencies, these are specific people in those agencies, such as agency officials, members of Congress, lawyers, group lobbyists. There are interagency councils, and their job are to settle disputes between agencies and help them cooperate more. And something related to that will be the policy coordinating committees that are created to facilitate interactions between agencies and departments to help policy develop faster. Critics may argue that the federal bureaucracy has way too much power because of administrative discretion and administrative adjudication. Administrative discretion is the ability of bureaucrats to make choices concerning the best way to implement congressional or executive interactions. This means that people in the bureaucracy can make decisions that they think is best, not relying on other people. Administrative adjudication is when a bureaucracy agency settles disputes between two parties, similar to the way courts resolve disputes. The bureaucracy is held accountable by the executive branch, judicial branch, Congress, and even the public. The executive branch controls the bureaucracy by the president appointing those who share views to cabinet. Although Congress can disapprove, almost always ruining the president's plan. The president can also issue executive orders, which are orders that have the force of law that don't need Congress's approval made by the president. Those take time, though. Congress can check on the bureaucracy by confirming or rejecting nominees and creating or abolishing departments and agencies. This usually directs the policy that the bureaucracy makes. And Congress also has the ability to fund or power the purse, which often influences how much a policy is highlighted in the bureaucracy. They also have the power of congressional review, which is another type of congressional oversight when joint resolutions of legislative disapproval can nullify agency regulations. Judicial control. They have less control, but still as important. The judicial branch can issue injunctions or orders to executive agency before a rule is publicized. And they order that agencies give due process rights. The judicial branch can also bring suit against agencies for not exercising their laws properly. Thank you for watching this clip on the executive branch. Some major takeaways of this video is that the executive branch continues to grow in power, as well as the government growing as the need of citizens' dependence increases. As crises continue to increase in this country, citizens will depend on the government to solve problems.